Good evening, Rowan. It's the 20th of December 2015 and it's just before midnight, and I'm a bit late making my Sunday evening video because I've been making marzipan for my Christmas cake, and then I had to put it on the Christmas cake, and then I had to tidy up everything and have a rest. And this was all after I'd cooked my lovely Sunday dinner with my Yorkshire puddings on my telescopic oven shelf again. I still haven't made you that video explaining how to make Yorkshire puddings. Perhaps you could look, see if there's a video on YouTube. You could do a few little classes or something like that to stand you in good stead for when you're in jail. Anyway, I thought I'd talk a bit more this evening about your strange lecture about Christmas at St Paul's Cathedral. So again, it's a very long lecture, so I'm just going to talk about a couple of things that you said. So anyway, you start off at the beginning of the clip I'm going to show later on saying, "The whole of the life ahead." And this takes us to the third carol because this is only the beginning. Well, I'd just like to say, Rowan, that's another nice try, but it's not only the beginning, it's only the end. So don't even bother. And in any case, the fact that you're saying it's the beginning makes it obvious that it's the end because you only ever lie. So anyway, you go on to say, God redefines human nature. You're talking about in Jesus, in the birth of Jesus here. But it isn't true. God isn't remaking or redefining human nature at all. He created human beings at the beginning in his own image and they were perfect. Human nature doesn't need remaking or redefining. It needs redeeming due to the fall. So he was not remaking or redefining human nature in the incarnation, which is when he took flesh in the person of Jesus. So God redefines human nature from within, but he does it by defenceless love, not by winning arguments. Now I've already commented on this twice, haven't I, Rowan? About you complaining about me trying to win arguments as you see it. And I've already said twice, once in relation to this on Twitter, that I've already won. I don't need to win any argument because I've already won. You're just wrong. You're 100% in the wrong. So having a snipe about how God doesn't try to win arguments or something isn't going to achieve anything. You're just trying to shut me up again, aren't you? He does it by defenceless love, not by winning arguments and not by winning battles. Indeed, you might almost say by losing arguments and losing battles. And then you go on. I nearly said to make a quotation from Jesus then, but as usual, you're misquoting him, so I'll just say what you said that he's saying. If my kingdom came from this world, says Jesus, my servants would be fighting. Well, this is a misquotation of John's Gospel, chapter 18, verse 36. I'm just going to read this in its context. So this is John chapter 18, beginning at verse 33. And it's when Jesus is being brought before Pilate to be put on trial. And this is what it says. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." So he's talking about physically fighting, isn't he? About summoning an army to fight off people who were about to put him to death. He's not talking about arguments or winning arguments anyway. And this is made further clear. I shall go on to read now from verse 37. Pilate asked him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. Pilate asked him, what is truth? Pilate sounds a bit like you then in that case, doesn't he? He must have been the first postmodernist Pontius Pilate. Anyway, so Jesus is saying that he's witnessing to the truth, which does actually tend to mean trying to win arguments in a kind of sense, except you're not really trying to win the argument, you're just telling the truth. And then somebody like you is just telling lies. And then I say, oh, that's a lie, this is the truth. And you think I'm going to shut up because you misquote Jesus to say that I'm not allowed to argue with you. Well, I don't think so. You're just making it up again, aren't you? To try and shut me up. And you're the one who's trying to win arguments. So if I believed in projection, I'd think that you were doing it. But it isn't projection, which is just a ridiculous thing. It's not projection. You're doing it on purpose to try and win an argument. So what do you say again? God redefines human nature from within, but does it by defenceless love, not by winning arguments, and not by winning battles. Indeed, you might almost say by losing arguments and losing battles. And that's when you misquote Jesus. If my kingdom came from this world, says Jesus, my servants would be fighting. Well, as I've said, he means summoning an army by fighting, or getting a band together and going and storming Pilate's office or whatever. That's what he means by fighting, because then he later on says, I'm testifying to the truth. So he's obviously not talking about arguing. So that's another thing you've just made up. And then you go on to say, and whenever you see Jesus' servants fighting, you might reasonably conclude that the kingdom is of this world, but that's another story. So even after all the evil abuse and lying and conniving that you do, you're still trying to make out that you've got the moral high ground. This is truly hilarious.
The whole of the life ahead. And that takes us to the third carol, because this is only the beginning. God remakes, redefines human nature from within, but does it by defenseless love. Not by winning arguments, and not by winning battles. Indeed, you might almost say, by losing arguments and losing battles. If my kingdom came from this world, says Jesus, my servants would be fighting. And whenever you see Jesus' servants fighting, you might reasonably conclude that the kingdom is of this world. But that's another story.
So you go on to say then, God changes things by letting go. Instead of living out a life that is protected and successful in human terms, God lets go. Well, when are you going to be letting go then, Rowan? Because you like comparing yourself to God and Jesus, don't you? So why don't you let go? Because I would point out that I've let go quite an awful lot, haven't I? I mean, I let my vocation go in Wales, twice in Bristol. Then I moved back to Yorkshire and I let go everything at St Michael's Church, and then I let go everything in the Anglican Church, and then I let my job go, I let my house go, I've let everything go. Do you think I'm letting go, arguing with you and telling you that you're a lying scumbag? I don't think so. Because I could quote the words of Jesus here, couldn't I? And say that I'm testifying to the truth, which is true. So stop being so manipulative. And also, I would point out that you, in another video, was this at the British Academy? Yes, I think it was. It was your blockbuster of a lecture at the British Academy where you claimed that you couldn't see the consequences of your actions in not so many words. So you've defined yourself as having a developmental age of less than 5 years old, which means that I'm a grown-up and you're not. So stop back-chatting. Don't argue with me. You're not grown up enough. And you've been very naughty. You're going on the naughty step if you carry on. Anyway, instead of living out a life that is protected and successful in human terms, what, you mean like your life? You mean like your life is and my life isn't? Is that the kind of life that you mean? God lets go. Jesus entrusts himself to unreliable people like you and me. Well, I'm not unreliable, Rowan. In fact, I'm a very reliable and loyal person, you know. That's the reason I stuck out the Church of England for so long. Because I'm a very loyal person. And you had quite a long time. I mean, I met you in 1992 and I left the Church of England in 2007. So that was 15 years you had to be appreciating my loyalty. So I think you had quite long enough, really, didn't you? You didn't appreciate it at all, did you? You still don't appreciate it. You're very ungrateful. God puts his life, you could say, in the hands of fragile, tempted, muddled and fearful people. Well, I'm not muddled or fearful. Are you muddled? Are you muddled? I'm not very much tempted either, if you think I'm tempted to be involving myself with perverts. I'm certainly not tempted by that. I've never been tempted to involve myself with perverts. Anyway, muddled and fearful people. This must be a confession. You are muddled and fearful, and tempted, and fragile. And you also live a protected and successful life in human terms. But you don't let go. You've never let go, have you? You're still like a dog worrying a bone now, aren't you? And you still think you can claim the moral high ground. You're completely unbelievable. This is your narcissistic delusions, you see. You can't admit that you're inadequate in any way. And whatever the details and whatever the theories, we're told unambiguously in the Christian scriptures that it's Christ's exposure to pain and death and failure that somehow mysteriously makes the difference, makes the change that is affirmed in the resurrection from the dead and the giving of the Holy Spirit. Well, that's not quite right either, is it? Because it wasn't really intrinsically Christ's exposure to pain and death and failure that made the difference. It was his obedience to God and his total surrender to God and following of his path which led him to pain and death and failure. Well, failure in human terms anyway. So it's true that the pain and death and failure made a difference, but many people have pain and death and failure. Well, everybody has pain and death and failure, but that doesn't redeem the world, does it? So it wasn't that intrinsically by itself that made the difference. It was the fact that Jesus was perfect and that he gave himself voluntarily and that he was totally obedient to God the Father. That's what made the difference, and that led to his pain and death, which he accepted because it was the will of his Father. He didn't do it just because he was a, what's the word, masochist. That's it. Any old death, pain and failure would have done otherwise. This is a story that gives us a model of God who will not use force upon us, and a humanity that will not defend itself for its own sake. Well, this is true, God will not use force on us, but you've used force on me, haven't you, continuously? And you've defended yourself for your own sake. I haven't defended myself for my own sake. I don't need to defend myself. I did say that actually in the letter I wrote, the final letter I wrote complaining about David Peat, where I said he had satanic energy. I could have just left there and not said anything about him, but because I was thinking that he's going to be doing this to somebody else, this is why I spent so much time speaking out about it, and why I won't let it go. Because I don't want people like you and him at large in the world to be causing so much damage and destruction to other people. You can't damage me so much because I know all about you, I know what you're like, but you're very good at taking other people in because you're so deceitful and manipulative.
We Three Kings of Orient, once you've separated it from the jolly knees-bending tune, contains all of that. Glorious now behold him arise, King and God and sacrifice. God changes things by letting go. Instead of living out a life that is protected and successful in human terms, God lets go. Jesus entrusts himself to unreliable people, like you and me. God puts his life, you could say, in the hands of fragile, tempted, muddled, and fearful people. And whatever the details and whatever the theories, we're told unambiguously in the Christian scriptures that it's Christ's exposure to pain and death and failure that somehow mysteriously makes the difference, makes the change that is affirmed in the resurrection from the dead and the giving of the Holy Spirit. This is a story which gives us a model of a God who will not use force upon us, and a humanity that will not defend itself for its own sake.
Finally, I thought I'd refer again to your quotation from Hebrews. Well, was it a quotation? No, you didn't quote it, did you? You misrepresented it again, as usual. Where you were trying to imply that God was about to run off and abandon me because his will wobbles, so you said, which is completely ridiculous. But anyway, I thought that you're not very clever, are you? You're not very good at critical thinking, because I thought, well, supposing I was convinced by your argument and thought, oh, God might run off and abandon me, this would be terrible, God doesn't love me anymore. Or perhaps I'd think, oh, well, God doesn't really exist, you know, if he just could be doing this one minute and doing this the next minute. I thought you might think, well, perhaps I'm going to become an atheist. But then I thought, well, even if I did become an atheist, would that mean that I'd want disgusting, perverted old men sexually harassing me, trying to screw me and slandering me behind my back for decades? And I thought probably not, because I have come across quite a few atheists, you see, in my life. And as far as I remember, none of them really liked the thought of being sexually harassed and abused by filthy old perverts and slandered behind their back for decades. So it's not really logical, is it? And it demonstrates that you're not very good at critical thinking, to think that should I abandon my faith or become disillusioned with it, then that would automatically mean I'd suddenly enjoy being sexually harassed and having disgusting old perverts trying to sexually abuse me and being slandered behind my back for decades. So you're not really thinking it through logically, are you? To think that becoming an atheist would mean that I would suddenly find disgusting old perverts trying to screw me a great idea. So anyway, I thought, well, I don't know, maybe this is a central doctrine of atheism that I haven't come across yet. So I thought that I might write to the Archbishop of Atheism, Richard Dawkins, and ask him about this matter. Now, he's a very evangelistic atheist. He thinks that the world would be a better place if everyone was an atheist. Well, that's the impression he presents anyway. So I thought if I wrote to him and told him I was thinking of converting to atheism, but I was a bit worried that I might suddenly start enjoying being sexually harassed, having disgusting old perverts trying to abuse me, and being slandered behind my back for decades, then this would quite put me off converting to atheism. So anyway, here's the letter that I've wrote to him. See what you think. Dear Mr. Dawkins, you see how polite I am to people who haven't tried to screw me. Dear Mr. Dawkins, I'm thinking of converting to atheism. One thing that is putting me off is that St. Rowan Williams the Great has insinuated that should I become an atheist I would enjoy being sexually harassed and abused by perverted old farts and alcoholic crap merchants. Could you advise me if it is a central doctrine of atheism that young women have to make themselves sexually available to disgusting old men? If so, it's not surprising that atheism is such a relatively unpopular creed. God bless you for your early response to my inquiry. So what do you think then? Anyway, as soon as he writes back to me, I'll let you know what he says. But don't forget, I know where you're going to be. I know where you're going to be. So be alert. And think that over. If I suddenly became an atheist, would that mean I'd enjoy being involved with disgusting, dirty bastards like you?
Most illogical reaction.